You're listening to the Today's Eden podcast, episode 11. Hey, what's up, guys? Thank you so much for listening in. Today, we are going to hear a story from Amy and Andy Nickel about their pregnancy journey with their son, Jeremiah. Pregnancy, like so many things, is such a fragile and beautiful journey, and the journey looks so different for each and every one of us. Some of us, upon hearing the words, "You're pregnant," is like a beautiful, joyful moment and a joyful 9 months. For others, God calls us down a different path of motherhood, one that can sometimes feel lonely, heartbreaking, or even surreal. Today in the podcast, I'm talking with this amazing couple who, on their journey towards parenthood, were taken down a path they didn't see coming. And we talk about how they handled it and how we as outsiders can love someone going through a similar situation better, and how they have found healing and comfort during their journey. A quote that came to mind after I had done this interview with them was, "She never knew just how deeply she could love until she stood on one side of the veil and her child on the other, her feet rooted on earth and her heart forever reaching towards heaven." And that is by Jessi Snapp. So I just want to share that with you guys, that this is this is going to hit the heart, you guys. And have your tissues ready in the car, because, sometimes life gives us things that we don't expect. But sometimes it's good to hear from others' stories so we can relate, so we can understand, and so we can support each other better. So without further ado, let's get to the convo with Amy and Andy Nickel. Amy and Andy, thank you so much for being open to coming on the show and talking about your very personal and emotional journey.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's our pleasure.
Thank you, Andy, for also being on with Amy and I. I'm so glad that you could be with us as well, because I feel like when a couple loses a child, we tend to think about the mother's well-being more so than the man's wrong or right, as this may be. But I think it's because most of the time we don't hide our emotions as well. As women, we don't hide our struggles as well, and we're better at confiding in our friends. And I feel like our husbands, our spouses, our partners, they have that weight of being our support of the marriage and the strong post. So sometimes the fact that they are hurting or struggling isn't as visible. So thank you for being a voice for all the men who have gone through or are currently going through a similar experience.
Yeah, sure thing. It's, like I said, it's our pleasure.
So before we go any further, let's back up. And would you guys mind sharing your journey with Jeremiah?
So back in April of 2014, we found out we were pregnant with our first child. And we were both really excited. And, we'd been married a little over a year and talked about starting our family. So we got pregnant pretty quick. We were going to a doctor and decided we would do the whole natural birth at a birthing center. So we had our first sonogram at my regular OB and found out it was confirmation of pregnancy. We got a sonogram and saw the little baby, and we're just really ecstatic. So then we looked into a birthing center and decided to go to Fort Worth Birthing Center. Mm-hmm. And they were great. They gave us a tour, and they prayed for all of their patients, and they're just really involved in the whole process of having a child. And so we were really excited about that. And we went for our first sonogram, our first appointment there. They actually told us that we didn't have to have a sonogram then, but our insurance would go ahead and do one since we switched over to them. So we were about 14 weeks along.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And that was our first appointment with them. And the owner, one of the owners of the Fort Worth Birthing Center, she was the one that was doing our appointment that day. She did a sonogram, and she just got really quiet. And I knew right then that something was wrong. And I had the brief thought when we were walking in, just like a fading thought quickly, that we're not promised everything's going to be okay. But, you just go into pregnancy thinking you're just so excited, and you just think about the things that can go wrong. So she continued to look, and she said, I'm seeing a little bit of an issue with the baby, and I just wanted to let you guys know it looks like the baby's bladder is protruding. And so from that moment, we just, it seemed like a long time that she was doing the sonogram. It probably was only a couple minutes, but she gave us a moment to ourselves, and we, of course, every thought ran through our heads, every bad thought, and we just got completely unexpected news. So from there, she came back in and told us that we probably should go ahead and get some blood work done to tell the gender of the baby, because that would help them diagnose. If it was a female, there would be different ways that they would treat it for the male. And then she told us that at that point we would probably be high risk. And so we would need to then transfer our care to a high risk doctor. So a lot happened in that one appointment. We went, I believe it was that same day, and got some blood work done, found out it was going to be a little boy. And that was really exciting, but at the same time, it was probably not the same excitement that it would be in normal circumstances, just because of all the weight of the health problems. So after that, we were transferred over to a high-risk doctor, and this doctor, she was very obviously not a believer, and so from the beginning, she tried to get us to abort Jeremiah, and she asked multiple times for the first several appointments. And we told her absolutely not. No matter what happens with this baby, it's our baby, and it's a human life that we have been given to care after, no matter how long that life is or how short it is. So we Andy finally asked her, please don't ask us again. Our decision is the same, and we're not changing our minds. We're not going to abort. So at that point, I feel like every appointment came with new challenges and new news, and most of it was bad. So the bladder continued to protrude, and it was filled with fluid, and it wasn't draining correctly. And so I learned so much about how babies develop just from all of this, more so than I probably ever would know normally. But at a certain point, the baby swallows the amniotic fluid and then urinates it out and creates more amniotic fluid. And that process wasn't happening. And so all the fluid was collecting in the bladder, and it wasn't being released. And so not only was Jeremiah's bladder not working correctly, and the process wasn't working, but I didn't have any amniotic fluid. So he didn't have any space, and ultimately that would have been the thing. His lungs wouldn't develop. There were just multiple things that causes multiple problems.
How was it processing that news when you guys went in at your 14 weeks, right? Your 14-week appointment.
Yes.
How was it processing that news, and what was kind of going through your guys' minds at that point?
I think for me, I had the immediate thought of, we serve a big God, and he can heal. So this little thing that the nurse is saying is a potential issue, like, my God's bigger than all of that.
Right.
And I have faith that, he's going to heal. So, I think for the male especially, because we don't carry the child, we don't have that emotional connection with the baby like the mother does.
Right.
And so, for me, hearing the news, it was a whole lot different than Amy hearing the news.
Mm.
But that was my first thought was, hey, God's big, he's good, and, he's going to heal this baby, so we're going to be fine.
Right.
And I think my viewpoint was I definitely had the thought of, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. I know that that the Lord can heal if he wants to,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it became just more immediate to me, knowing that it was probably going to be a difficult pregnancy.
Right. Yeah, because not only, when you're physically carrying something inside of you, then it's a whole another ball game that you're not only emotionally dealing with it, but physically trying to handle that situation as well when your body is already going through all these changes too. When you decided to see, from the beginning, or at least at this point, you guys have already decided, like, we're going to see this whole thing through. How hard was that process to continue from then on to carry out the pregnancy emotionally and physically?
I think, for me, I never really thought about the process of when you become a mother,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it happens immediately when you find out you're pregnant, because you become protective of that baby and you start bonding with the little one that's growing inside of you. And so I think the further along in the process we were, the more protective I was, and just felt like I needed to fight for his life.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that taught me a lot about motherhood before I even knew this baby,
Mm-hmm.
before I even saw his face or anything.
And I think for me, it was really just going along with the process. I don't know that I really ever sat down to contemplate really what was going to happen, probably until almost the end. I mean, the last several weeks of the pregnancy. For me, it was just like, okay, well, our next appointment is this date. We'll just pray that something miraculously will happen between now and then.
Mm-hmm.
And again, because I wasn't carrying the baby, I was much more process oriented of like, oh, well, the next step is just this.
Yeah, I feel like it was an every day I would think about Jeremiah, and I think it was a daily thing for me. Whereas for Andy, I think he tried to busy himself with other things, so he didn't think about it as often, or maybe not have to deal with it as much. But for me, it was from the beginning. I couldn't not think about the issues or just envision our lives with this child, or what it would be like if we were not able to have this child. And so it was very much a daily fight, and a daily focus for me as well.
And if you don't mind me asking, how did you find the support, or what did you guys need going into the final days of your pregnancy? Was there anything that you guys talked about as a couple that you needed to do for each other, for yourselves, leading up to those last few days and the day of the birth?
I think the hospital that we went to was really, really good in terms of, they had a program. I can't think of the name of it anymore.
We Care.
We Care, yeah. So they had a program basically called We Care, where they would come in, and for people in situations like us who had a very high probability that we were going to lose a child, they would sit down and talk with you and say, okay, what do you want us to try? How far do you want us to go? And that was really beneficial for us because, as hard as it was to do, we at least had a plan going into the day of delivery. And so, that helped us talk through our options and things I think we probably wouldn't have discussed without that. So, having the understanding between each other, yes, we'll try these certain things, but we don't want him to suffer. We don't want him to have years and years and years of surgeries. So that was really beneficial to us. And then kind of knowing going into, the delivery day, that's what's going to happen. I think there was a lot of anticipation, especially the night before, of, again, knowing the odds that the doctors had given us, and still thinking that our God's good and that He's big and that this baby could be a miracle baby. And that was our hope, was that He would, everything would be okay, or He would at least make it, and we could go back to our doctor and say, this is why we didn't move forward.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think even that aspect of the anticipation building up to it was something we both experienced.
And I think, for me, the day of delivery, I was at because we had a planned C-section. Our doctor, in the end, we were going to deliver naturally and just wait for Jeremiah to come. But he was breech and he didn't have room to turn around. And so our doctor said she would deliver him breech, but she wouldn't monitor his heart rate. And so if there was too much stress on him, then she wasn't going to do anything about it because they weren't going to monitor his heart rate. And, she made it clear to us that his life wasn't really a topic for conversation because she was so certain he wasn't going to live, that she was more concerned about me and my health during that time. So we made the decision to do a C-section because it gave him better odds of life. If his lungs were going to respond and were going to be able to breathe, then doing a C-section would give him more time for them to get to him and help him. So we decided to do that. But the day of delivery was, I was probably at the most peace throughout the whole process on that day, because I finally got to meet my little boy and see his face. You anticipate that the whole pregnancy, just what will they look like? What will they be like? And so I was at the most peace on that day. And I feel like Andy, that was probably the hardest day for him out of the whole thing.
Did you ask Andy for any kind of specific support for that day or the days after? Was there anything that you needed him to be there for you about? Or I'm sorry, I'm just curious because for other couples that are possibly going through this, I'm wondering how we can help men better support their wives who are going through the same things, or how can they be there for them in the best way?
I look back at that time and I feel like that was a couple years ago. I feel like we've grown a lot since then, just in our marriage in general. And then that experience, of course, grew us. But I wish I would have told Andy more specifically what I needed. I was trying to be tough for him as well. And I didn't understand that because he grieved differently than I did, that he still cared just as much. And so it was hard for me to feel like he was as affected as I was, and until afterwards. And then I feel like when we delivered Jeremiah, and then the weeks following, that's really when Andy came to me and he said, hey, I really think it would be a good idea for us to read a psalm a day together and just take time focusing on that and praying together. And so we did that, and that was really healing for me, and just knowing that he cared not only about the situation and the circumstances, but he cared about my well-being in that too. And he was just really shepherding me well during that time, even though he was grieving. But I would say that's probably the biggest thing, is just realize that if your spouse is grieving differently than you, it's not a bad thing. It just means that they're different. God created men and women differently, and with different emotions and different personality traits, and that just comes out differently in times of grief.
Yeah, and I think as far as what I wish I would have done differently was probably engage her more during that process, because I didn't realize, like I said, or like she said, she was holding stuff in. I just assumed she was telling me, and I mean, I failed to really be sensitive to the fact of, hey, I probably need to sit down and ask her, hey, how's she doing today, or what's going on in her mind. So that's something I would definitely do different.
Yeah, but I mean, going through this is kind of, you don't have any experience to know what to do, or it's kind of, you're just playing it as it comes and trying to be married as well, because you guys had been married for a year at this point, or
It was
About
2.
Oh, 2
Yeah, right.
years.
It's 2 years.
by the time he was delivered, it was 2 years.
Yeah.
So, how do you grieve something like this in a healthy way, or is there a healthy way to go about pushing through the days after, and how do you find the support and the ability to push through those days after?
I mean, first of all, we had an amazing community around us with our church. We had been fortunate enough to get plugged into a community group that was amazing. And then the staff of the church was amazing as well. So having them reach out to us, and then people just brought us meals and came and loved on us for really 30 days straight. Every single day we would have a new person bringing us a meal. And that in and of itself was amazing because it allowed us to sit down and just laugh with people, but also grieve with them as well, and kind of get to interact at maybe a level that we hadn't been able to with some friends. But the biggest thing for me was just continue to preach the gospel to myself, that I knew that that he's good, that he's only good, that he loved me, that he knew me. I had actually, the crazy thing, I had been studying Luke 12 around that same time. And there's a passage in there that talks about, God knows the number of hairs we have on our head. And that just really resonated with the fact that he wasn't surprised that we were going through this, because he knew me. And at the end of the day, God is for my good, even though it's tough and sometimes, things don't go the way we envision. Ultimately, it's for our good. And I remember sitting in the hospital just thinking, like, God, why us?
Yeah.
We love you, we serve, we do all these things, and yet the Lord was just kind and reminding me, Andy, I used you in this scenario because I know that you can tell my story and you'll make my name great. So it wasn't about us, it was about him and what he was going to do with his name through us. And that to this day is still incredibly humbling. We still have this opportunity now, almost 3 years later, to share the grace that's in this hardship for us.
And I would say along the same lines, it's, the things that the Lord shows you in the mundane, everyday life, when you're reading his word, when you're just a part of a local body, when you're singing songs, things that are deeply rooted in your soul, come out during this time and help you understand the Lord's working. I think I felt just a huge amount of peace, and I just felt the Lord's grace, and I felt just a personal closeness with the Lord that I never felt quite like that before. Just knowing that every step of the way he was walking us through it, and all the things I studied from the time I was a child in Sunday school, it's during times like this that those really come to play, because that's when you need it the most, is to remember God's character, remember who he is and what he's doing. And Romans 8 was huge for me during this time, just the whole chapter, but specifically verses 18 through the ends. But the first part of that, Romans 8:18, says, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God." And just knowing that, our future glory is where all of this really matters. And we go through things now that we may never fully understand, but it's shaping our eternity. And it's really bringing out just what we believe, who we believe God to be. And, the times that you study scripture and it just seems kind of like, I don't really want to do my Bible study today. It's those things that you remember in extreme times like this.
Is there any suggestions that you guys have for couples going through this, or that have going through this, how they can better go through the grieving process? Is there any suggestions that you guys have for them to do?
That's interesting. I mean, I would just say continue to remind yourself of the truth that you know, because that's what we had to cling to. Like Amy said, going through these Bible studies throughout the years and knowing different things, it's when you go through something like this, that really puts it in to a test. And so you really get to kind of get gritty with yourself and say, do I really believe what I've been studying over these past years? And those are the things on the hard days that gave me hope, that continues to give me hope, like Amy said with Romans 8, that one day all this will pass away and all things will be made new. And until that day, things just stink. And we're going to have to go through these things. But knowing that, again, Jesus is going to return, that gives me hope, and it helps me deal with the reality of the situation.
I would say just to find a support group. There's people that really mean well and want to help you. And I think grief in our society, people don't know really what to do with that. People who are in the midst of grief. And, we had people that said some kind of crazy things to us, just thinking they were helping, but it was stuff that you couldn't really put your hope in. Right. And so it really, you just have to be kind to the people that pursue you because they just want to help. And I feel like you need the people that you can call when you want to talk about it, the people who will listen, because not everybody knows how to handle situations like that. Right. And not everyone really wants to sit down and listen to your story. And so in the days of grieving and then the days after, grief comes in waves. And that's something that kind of surprised me, is that even a year or two after, there's still days that are difficult. And it's not as difficult as it was when we were going through it, but there's still days that just make me miss Jeremiah a lot, or just make me think of how life would be different with him here. And, there's people that have specifically told me, hey, when you're having a hard day, you can call me or text me and I'll pray for you. And just having those people that will be dependable through the whole process.
That brings me to another question that I had for you guys. And writing this out, it felt very awkward, but it's something that I know that that goes through my mind, and I know that it goes through other people who are on the outside of these experiences. But like especially as women, when you have a friend who is going through infertility issues or the loss of a child, and your kids are running around, or you are yourself pregnant, or I think that we kind of ask ourselves, like, is it okay to invite them to our baby shower? Should I bring my kids around them? Like, it's kind of a weird place to be, of people wanting to pursue you but not knowing how to. So I kind of just wanted to bring that to light, because I feel like it's something that we all wonder but we don't talk about, so we end up avoiding the people that we love that are experiencing hard things, or our friends. So how do we as outsiders support someone, and is there an etiquette, so to speak, to respecting what your friend or someone who is going through this?
I think people are very different in their personalities and how they handle things. And just in grieving in general, it's the same. I think people handle that very differently. But in general, I think Andy and I were both very open. Even now, we're very open about talking about our circumstances and about that time, and even the struggles now. So we just wanted to be pursued like we always had been. We did not want to be put in a box. You don't want to feel different. And a lot of times, you're right. I think people don't know what to do with that. So they say, well, I'm not going to invite them to this, or I'm not going to call them today because I don't want them to feel awkward or strange. But I think just the more normal life is, the easier it is to feel like there's not something wrong with you. And so just speaking for us, we wanted to continue to be pursued. And you also, I think, need to be gracious in that, because there will be times that are more difficult, and there will be days when people may not be able to attend events because it reminds them of the grief too much. But in general, I feel like we wanted to continue doing life just the normal way we had always known how.
And I'll just kind of add something a little bit to that. I think not being afraid of the awkwardness. Like you said, it might be awkward to kind of talk about it, but even in the moment of saying like, hey, we understand you guys just went through this, so I don't really know how to approach it, but I want to invite you to this. I just don't know how you feel about it. You know, tell me how do you feel or whatever. You know, it's kind of entering into it, acknowledging, yes, it's awkward.
Yeah.
It's awkward for everybody involved, but yet entering into that awkwardness and letting them know that you love them, I think is huge. And just getting it out there in the open.
That's a really good point because, you know, we feel the awkwardness just as much as the people that were pursuing us did. And so when people would kind of hint around things, I would just openly say, hey, I don't mind if you ask me about that, or I don't mind talking about it. And I think it kind of made people take a deep breath, like, oh, okay, good. It's okay to approach that topic. So I completely agree with that.
Was there any big, or not big, but was there any sort of, I want to say lesson, I don't have the right word, but kind of thing that you took away from this whole experience that, like, I know you guys felt like you had a story to share, but I'm curious, like, what the specific reason from your own heart, like, what did you feel you got from the experience that gave you that specific feeling to share your story?
I feel like I learned a lot about grief and how to pursue people that are grieving in all different circumstances. And I look at my life before this happened, and I think I really handled people poorly in my life before. And so I'm thankful to know how to better pursue people that are grieving. Also, I feel like it just gave me a different perspective of God. And you know, you read these stories about people in the Bible going through situations, and a lot of times you disconnect yourself from it. But I think just seeing the themes of how God works the same from the beginning of time until now, it's really helped me better relate to people in Scripture, and just seeing that it's not just a story, but these were people's lives that were affected by pain and suffering and joy and, you know, all of those things for the purposes of telling the story of the gospel and revealing who God is and his character. So it really just opened all of that for me as well.
If people who are listening couldn't already tell, that there is a baby in the background. So there is a gift of light in this story of your guys's. And I guess I had read exactly a year later that you guys were blessed with the pregnancy of Mariah.
Yeah, so we had Jeremiah on December 29th, 2014, and then we had Mariah on December 17th of 2015.
Oh, wow.
And we actually are pregnant now as well.
Oh my gosh, congratulations.
Thank you.
I had no idea.
Yeah, so we're doing June with this one.
Oh, well, congrats.
Thanks.
So was that scary, deciding to try again? Or what were your emotions or feelings, or what did you guys talk about, moving forward with having another child after your experience and your journey?
I think when you go through something like that, especially with your first child, it forever changes every pregnancy after. Even though, again, we can look back and realize God's grace in all of it, every appointment is what's going to happen, you know? For me. Yeah. And so, yeah, it's definitely, it's a game changer, because you go in, you're waiting for the doctor to give some form of bad news. And when it's good news, you just think like, whew, we made it through one more. And so, and then, you know, you have friends that go through complications or that go through different things. And it's, when you have a healthy baby, it just makes you count your blessings even more, thinking how crazy it is that God allowed it to be normal the second time around.
Well, and for me, I feel like, again, this is just differences in how Andy and I process things. It's made me a lot more open-handed with our pregnancies. And the conversation after Jeremiah was, we hadn't planned on getting pregnant that quickly after, but we were ready whenever, because we felt like, we were ready to be parents.
Mm-hmm.
And we went through so much with Jeremiah that it really, we loved him so much, even though he's not a continuing part of our family in the day to day. But we were just ready to be parents.
Mm-hmm.
And so no matter how long that took, or how short in our situation of a time that was in between, we were ready to love on a baby, that just to hold another baby in our arms and to love on them. And I think that I've been a lot more open-handed since we lost Jeremiah, and it's just made me think, we're not promised anything. We're not promised marriage or babies or even another day of life. And God is faithful, and he's, in our situation, he's more than abundantly blessed us with Jeremiah, and then with Mariah and this baby, of course. And so we're grateful for that, and just very open-handed with our babies.
Well, I think that's awesome. And you guys are, I was just thinking personally, that would be a hard situation to, I think, like Andy said, with right out the gate, it wasn't like you guys experienced a normal pregnancy and then it happened on the second, but it was right away on the first one that, to where you don't know to expect anything else. So, when it's a traumatic experience with the first one and the second one, you're just kind of on pins and needles the whole time. How did you have to check yourself to be like too negative, or like waiting for the bottom to fall out? Did you have to kind of say like, wait a minute, like I can't always expect the worst? Or how did you balance that? Or did you just kind of go emotion to emotion?
Yeah, every time we would go to an appointment, I would have the initial thought of like, okay, what's going to happen? But then I would just be reminded of what happened the first time around,
Mm-hmm.
and think, how did I get through it then?
Yeah.
I preached the gospel to myself, and God's character hasn't changed between now and a year and a half ago. So I have to still go with what I know, even though I have that feeling. And I think Matt Chandler talks about it all the time when he goes in for his yearly checkups with his cancer. Like, he has this anxiety once a year. And to me, it's kind of a similar process.
Well, I would just want to acknowledge you guys for being so faithful. I remember seeing you guys, and we hadn't really talked personally, at a deeper level as, couple to couple. And when we would see you guys at, the children's check-in, I would just see on the outside, and internally you may have been processing and handling it much different, but from the outside, I can just remember telling Dalton, like, I don't know if I have that level of faith to be able to go through this. Yeah. And the way that you guys have gone through it, or, we're physically showing it anyways. And so that was really appearing for me, is to press into, well, my own pursuit of God and my faith. And so, yeah, that was really encouraging to see you guys, and to see your faith through the journey, to see how you were, dealing with the situation, hearing you guys talk about it. And it was just really powerful, really encouraging, and definitely very inspiring. But yeah, and I just want to thank you guys for being the deliverer of God's message through your journey, through your story. And I'm just so grateful that you guys could share this with me. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Well, thank you for sharing that as well. That's things that we don't necessarily always know and hear. And again, it goes to God's faithfulness, and just the ways that he's using us that we really don't even know. So thank you for sharing.
So I have a few last questions to ask you guys. And I wanted to know what the most influential book you've read, and it can be pertaining to this. I was going to ask you, if it was a book outside of this topic, are there any books that you can suggest for a a couple or a person going through a similar experience as well?
So one book that I was given that I read through this process, or right after, I guess, it's called Holding On to Hope, and it's by Nancy Guthrie. And she walks through just the loss of her babies and just does a study on the book of Job and just has the perspective of, Job realized that everything he lost was not really his. Like, the Lord gave it all to him to begin with. And so he was just a steward of that. So just that thought continued to come to mind for me. But that book, I feel like, is really good for grieving parents in particular.
What was the one thing that you guys would like to tell grieving parents or parents who are currently going through this?
Man, just that there's hope. In the moment, I'm sure it seems like that you don't know how you're going to get through it, but that there's hope in Jesus. And like Amy mentioned earlier, the Romans 8 section was something that just really opened my eyes to, yes, one day all this will end. It's really hard right now, but cling to the hope that's found in Jesus. Because that never changes.
I think another thing is, our society really needs to see people that grieve and grieve well. And when I say that, what I mean is just to be open with your grief and invite people along in the journey. Because if you haven't experienced something like this and you haven't seen people grieve well, you can make it your whole identity. And when that's your identity, the grief or the situation that's happened to you, then it's not healthy. I feel like it's healthier just to be bold about grieving and not care what people think about the tears. And there were many people that I was able to talk through things pretty well with most people, but there were times when I would just, in the middle of a conversation, I would just break down in tears. That's okay. That happens. Yeah. And you don't have to put on a front. And the grief definitely does come in waves. And so it's just an ongoing thing to know how to navigate that.
Yeah, I think that is in all areas kind of something that we struggle with today, is just being more transparent with each other instead of, social media kind of puts up the rose-colored glasses kind of thing, and then we don't know how to handle situations when they do come up. And that's why, again, I'm so thankful that you guys are sharing this story, because I hope this helps other people. I had a friend that just, another friend that just lost her baby, and so I'm hoping, that this brings some sort of light to her, that there is healing past this point, past the point that she's at. And so very, very powerful. What is one thing, Amy, that you'd specifically like to tell moms that have gone through or are going through this?
I would just reiterate the importance of talking to your spouse and just your support group about what you need. And it can change daily. It does in different seasons of the grief, but just be open and vocal, and make sure you have 2 or 3 people that you can go to that will listen when all you want to do is just cry or talk about the situation or talk about the grief. And then also those same people that you feel comfortable talking to when you say, today's going to be a hard day, or, I'm not looking forward to this. So just have a support group and be open with them and just voice your needs.
Andy, is there anything that you would like to specifically tell husbands or fathers that are going through or have gone through this?
Yeah, just that, again, we process that whole pregnancy different. And so because we don't have that emotional connection, don't be afraid to, especially during this period, emotionally connect with your wife. Take moments just to pray together, or to just talk and let her express how she's feeling and listen. That's one thing, like I said earlier, I wish I would have done better. But yeah, that would be my advice to fathers going through this.
Well, before we end, do you guys have anything else to add to you guys shared some awesome advice. Do you have anything else that you would like to share before we go?
I think the only other thing that came to mind just in the past couple of minutes is, we talked earlier, like, how do people engage us as the people going through the situation?
Right.
And, having people just come and sit with us, or, it was so encouraging to have somebody tell us, hey, we know you've been gone, but it's so great to see your face this morning, back when we started doing check-in again. So just, again, not necessarily even acknowledging the situation, but just being friendly and interacting with people. I think kind of someone on a normal level was very nice.
Not being afraid to engage.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's the only thing I would add.
Well, thank you guys so much for being on and sharing Jeremiah's story. And I'm so excited for you guys and your growing family. So congratulations again. And just thank you for taking the time to talk with me. I'm glad that I got to know you guys a little bit better. It's kind of hard when we're chasing kiddos to have a real conversation, So I appreciate you guys, and I thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, you guys, I'm so thankful to have had that conversation with Amy and Andy. And as you could tell during the interview, there were still some things or some hesitation from me when I would ask questions, just because if I haven't experienced that journey myself, you don't want to offend somebody, or you don't necessarily relate emotionally. And so listening back, I felt like there were some times that it seemed I didn't connect, and I was trying to be very careful with the things that I said. And so that just made it more apparent to myself that I needed to put this story out there, so I can connect and I can relate and I can move forward, understanding somebody else's journey, understanding the emotions that I haven't experienced myself. And so that we and you listening can gain those perspectives and insight as well. So I hope that this did help you. And I hope that if you have experienced something like this, that you feel a little less alone and you feel like there's hope. And like Andy said, cling to the hope that's found in Jesus, because that never changes. So again, I'm super grateful for them to bear it all for millions to hear, so that way a bigger message could be spread to all of us who might need to hear it. If you want to check out the show notes for this episode, or to find the book that Amy mentioned, Holding On to Hope by Nancy Guthrie, I linked that on their show notes page as well. So you, if you need it, can find it there at todayseden.com/podcasts with an S, podcasts /011. And you can find all the podcast episodes with their show notes by going there. And if you get a chance when you're listening on iTunes, review and rate this podcast for me. I would really appreciate it. It helps keep this podcast at the top of the list so others can find it, others can learn, that need to hear these messages that I'm sharing with you guys. And also just because I'm putting work into Today's Eden by myself, that it helps me to continue to be able to do that. So I'm so grateful again for you guys tuning in, supporting Today's Eden, and I hope you enjoyed it. And as you go out into the week, I hope you remember to do what they think you can't do. You got this, Mama.